The question is, how does that translate into AI? What's computing power without value consistency in volatile times? And in this conversation between Patrick Pugh, the global alliance with leaders for PwC. No, that's close enough. All right. And the founder and co-president of Artificial Integrity Institute, Hamilton Mann, will introduce you to the fascinating concept of artificial integrity. Gentlemen, the stage is now yours.
Okay. Thank you all. I appreciate people coming out on a Friday afternoon. So thank you for hanging in there with us. I think Hamilton and I are going to have a fantastic conversation.
Hi, everyone.
And the pressure of talking about the soul of AI, too. That's a new one on our shoulders.
That's a new topic.
That's going to be good. So Hamilton, we are all rolling out AI fast. I mean, at a pace, I've been doing this for many decades, and it's a pace I've never seen before. Speed, speed, speed. At the same time, building integrity and trust and responsibility into these new technologies that we have out there could be seen as clunky, cumbersome, a compliance exercise. Given that contrast of a desire for speed and trust, how should companies be thinking about building trust into AI from the get-go?
Yeah. So I think this is a very critical point, right? And we feel the tensions between the two over time. I like to, let's say, take the point of the car manufacturers, right? Let's take, let's say, the example of a car manufacturers thinking like, okay, we are under pressure, you know, the market is very competitive, and so maybe let's try to release some car without braking systems, okay? And we're trying to figuring out, you know, how to, let's say, integrate and include those braking systems afterwards. I'm sure that everybody will argue that this is not possible, this is not acceptable, right? And I think this is very much basically what happened with AI systems nowadays in terms of, let's say, reflection and reasoning. Of course, we all understand that when it comes to the braking systems for car, this is not something that you can, you know, think about afterwards, after the conception of every element and component of the car, just because the braking system itself is an integral part of the car, of the design, right, of the machine. Of course, it will imply and affect many of the critical components. You can think about the wheel, let's say, you know, assemblies, the weight distribution, the driver interface, whether you think about the pedals, the alert, the dashboard. You can think about, you know, the chassis design also as well. And of course, the electronic core systems. So as you, let's say, think about designing all those major components, the braking systems, right, is very much part of the requirement that influence the design of those components. Same principle applies with AI systems, okay? Because the safeguards, the guardrails, kind of layers and governance that you, let's say, needs to think about so you can have trustworthy AI, so you can have safe kind of AI, is very much affecting as much, right? Some key major elements of the model, thinking about like the core architecture or let's say the reasoning mechanisms, the explainability mechanism, the transparency mechanisms, and even the, let's say, you know, AI interface, right, per se, the kind of a human interface that you can, let's say, experience when you are using your AI. So, long story short, this is the reason why I think leaders nowadays, whether you are building AI or using it, needs to understand that we cannot go for performance first and trust later, right? We need to build performance and trust at the same time, right?
Well, and as someone who also thinks through metaphors, I loved the analogy because while it is way more fun to put your foot on the gas, there are times when we need to either be able to tap that brake slowly or jam it on. And as we're learning with these models, sometimes we got to kind of pause and let them course correct, or in recently he said sometimes we just got to rip it out for short term. So I love that brake analogy. I will probably use it later, and I'll give you full credit every time we do it. So I like it.
Still with pride.
Love it, actually. I love that, love that. So when we look at the progress, we've talked about speed. Companies are piloting, they're tinkering with AI, they're pumping out massive amounts of stuff.
Yeah.
I would argue we haven't seen impact and value at scale.
Yeah.
So when you start to think about companies moving from the pilot stage to really trying to get the most out of these technologies, how should we be thinking about driving measurable outcomes that matter and drive impact rather than just stuff?
Yeah. So, of course, this is, let's say, one of the conversation that is quite passionate nowadays. As, let's say, people get the call for action of running for deploying AI. They also look at peers and figuring out that, okay, this is not that easy to get some, those kind of a productivity gain that we expect to, let's say, get from the investment and the kind of efforts that is going on. I think the solution is basically part of what we collectively need to avoid as far as the kind of bad assumption is concerned, and as far as the form of a blind spot that we may have also as well when it comes to understanding our organizations. An organization is a system, right? Complex systems. As soon as you put more than 2 human beings working together, it's starting to become complex. And so I think, first, there is a kind of a, let's say, confusion between the efficiency unit gain, which is something that you can observe, right? When you put the magnifying glasses and you see, oh, yes, we have an efficiency unit gains right here, okay? But efficiency unit gain doesn't equal productivity gain, and especially net productivity gain. Why? A few points, right? First, we may sometimes assume that we are, let's say, considering the organization systems with only productive work. And of course, this is, let's say, a fantasy because we may have productive work happening within organizations, but we also have unproductive work happening every day. And some of those unproductivity that happens every day, right? Because we are human and we are not perfect. It is very much part of, let's say, the things that you may unattendedly exacerbating with your AI form of a deployment. So instead of, let's say, enabling and empowering a form of a whole organization with the productivity capacity, you also happens to be augmenting unproductive work. That's number one. Number two, we also know that, when it comes to organization, there is, let's say, a point related to the processes that we are relying on to delivering value, okay? And the processes that we are relying on is basically, let's say, some kind of a, how to put it, the critical avenue that we experience each and every day at work for delivering any outcomes. The assumptions that we sometimes take, right, when deploying AI is considering that each and every processes that we know so far are very, very great foundation. Let's not touch anything about it. Very great foundation for deploying AI on it, right? So you can imagine all those processes and we put the AI layer just, in the surface of it, and we, tend to think that, bam, this is going to work. The reality is that deploying AI is basically a kind of an invitation for the whole organization to question, to challenge the status quo, and sometimes even to revisit what we consider to be the centuries kind of a processes that we have always experienced in this way. Hard to do, very hard to do. Maybe a last but not least point, and not to be exhaustive, but I think this one also is quite worthwhile when it comes to deploying AI, and it is basically also related to the integrity of that organization system itself, which is the, let's say, trap in terms of thinking that when it comes to productivity, you have an equation that, let's say, state that each and every tangible input are very much necessary to drive our different outcomes. So now let's start to measure and have our greatest KPI to figuring out where are those tangible inputs, whether it is about labor, materials, capital, right? And as soon as we are able to drive those kind of tangible inputs, we may secure our way to navigate toward the right outcome that we expect. Of course, reality is more complex than that because you also have to take into account in the equation the intangible input and what it is. It is bring by us as humans. This is the magic of the things. When you have an organizations working together, it is not just about the tangible inputs. Any great leaders knows that you also have to look at what is intangible. It is a bit like, acknowledging the forces, the philosophy forces of Blaise Pascal and René Descartes at the same time, right? So not just that you need to be Cartesian, but you also need to think that Earth have its very own reason that reason itself ignore, right? So when it comes to making works, you know that you need to have not only, let's say, people that have hard skills, but you need to have patience in your work. You need to have people that like each other in your work. You need to have also love in terms of what I'm doing at work. You need to have critical thinking, judgment, those things, right? I don't know any leaders that have a kind of a dashboard measuring those kind of things. Yes, of course. But I know many leaders, they know for sure that if they don't have this, AI or not, the organization will collapse. So this is, few points, and actually it challenged the kind of a, let's say, way of thinking about, okay, let's get measuring what we can measure, right? Because everything that we can measure can be managed. No, not at all, right? Right? We need to acknowledge also the fact that, it comes with a form of uncertainties, and not only that, not that you can measure can be managed, but also not all that can be managed can be measured, right? So just a few points in terms of what makes that hard for organizations, right, in deploying AI to get productivity results. So it means that when looking at all those kind of trap and lapses, you need to also have your, let's say, monitoring kind of setups as an organization to look at those intangible kind of a side effect so that it can inform you in the way to navigate how to ingrain, how to include a form of inorganic intelligence within an organic intelligence systems.
I love it. One, I think you also just answered the framing of where the soul comes from in this whole thing by the emotional side. So I love that we actually hit that. So check, we got that answered. The other one that I think you really nicely touched on that's been a theme here, some of the work we've seen and done out there, is to make that impact, it has to be at the organizational level. And that complexity comes when you're breaking across barriers that naturally don't want to work together. Maybe they say they do, but we know that cross-organization can be very complex. Since we're in the sovereignty arena, I'd be remiss not to talk about sovereignty and control and such. So if we look at the world today, AI, you could argue, is largely being driven by the US and China at scale. First, the innovation that's going on here in France is inspiring, and you see the power of France and EMEA. How do businesses think about being collaborative and realistic where work is rapidly accelerating, but also not giving up their digital control or their digital freedom? So how do you balance that complexity of two major powers driving it, but a lot to harness here locally and to keep that digital control?
Yeah. So when it comes to sovereignties, I think, and you're right, the first words that come to mind is control. I would like to, let's say, maybe put on hold for a minute that word and that concept of control, and maybe put some emphasis in another concept that is separation. I think that when it comes to, let's say, sovereignty, whether it is about at country, nation level, and where it is about organizational level, and even at individual level, no matter the strategy that you want to, let's say, think about and deliver at the end, it is about how is it that you think by design in terms of being capable of separate yourself from anything to which you depend on while continuing to function. That's the critical point. You may have the bigger models, the more perfect, let's say the more perfect or performance kind of, let's say, models, if you did not think about the way to design your setting so that it can continue to function in separation, you don't have sovereignty, right? So another way to say that is like, you need to look at the interdependencies. I'm not saying that you don't need to be interdependent. I'm not saying that it is, let's say, not the opportunities to partner with, let's say, different stakeholders. I'm saying that you don't want to put all your eggs in the same buckets. That's the point. So when you have some countries deploying at nation level one software, only one, right? I'm not naming any countries. You can think about it. Only one software.
No comment.
That everybody is using at nation level, institutional level, organization level, even at individual level, right? This is basically where the lack of sovereignty is happening. So the point is like, you don't need to have the best of it, right? When you look at, let's say, peers and other, let's say, other folks, and you're like, oh, they have been building this for years. We are just starting to reflect on it. So, I mean, we cannot cope with the lake and with the, let's say, kind of a, let's say, distance that we have with those different, let's say, partners and peers, right? I think this is not the point, and this is not what matters. What matters is to create your ecosystems of different players on which you are going to rely on to do your things, while thinking beyond, let's say thinking beyond not just the usage, but also the way you design separation in case you need to separate, right? So this is like, best of breed kind of approach that is not new so far. But, instead of controlling, it is very much about, exercising your, let's say, responsibility in terms of separation.
Well, and I really like the framing of separation versus control, because control has a stifling, pausing innovation demeanor to it, whereas separation actually is a new challenge that will spark innovation. Of how do you do rapid separation should an event happen?
Exactly. And actually, when you are very good at, let's say, managing the way your systems and the way your organizations, let's say, is ready for activating separation, you start to becoming critical as a partner for many other people because they don't want you to separate, right? So you create a form of a dependency where power is equilibrium, right?
Okay, we got time for one more. I've been in the tech and telco space for 30 years. Oftentimes, trust is not the first adjective used to describe the industry. Now with AI, we're taking and doing things with data that we've never done before. Customers are skeptical, people are skeptical. Do you see an opportunity for companies to have transparency and sharing and being very open with what they're doing as a competitive advantage, a new component of value? Or how do you see that role of transparency playing into this mix?
Yes, I think this is a very, let's say, important point actually, because so we are very much at the beginning of a story, even though it feels like, the world is very much moving fast. And that we sometimes may feel like, oh, wow, we are very advanced. Basically, I think our children, we are looking at the world when they are entering to their new work and so on and so forth. They are going to live a different world that we are living nowadays. So we are very much early stage in many things that is happening, which is, let's say, create a great invitation for each and every one of us, no matter, let's say, the sectors and the activities that we have, to see how we can contribute to building this new world, right? This new world where a kind of a new form of intelligence is included within our societies worldwide. And I think that we are a social species, and as a social species, transparency, trust is very critical. And it is very critical even from the kind of economical landscape that we are, let's say, experiencing each and every day, no matter the countries, right? We know that when someone, let's say, when some companies, lose some trust in the market, it have a direct impact, right, in stock market, right? It feels sometimes a bit irrational, but I think this is interesting because this is the connection between, let's say, the critical reality of being human, right? Again, back to Blaise Pascal and René Descartes, okay? And so I think this kind of a new world where AI is, let's say, part of each and every day life of each and every one of us is just asking you and is just asking us the same question. How is it that we can continue to, let's say, sustain as a social species trust in each and every interaction that we will have, not only between us, but of course with the machine. And this is not optional. This is very much part of our DNA and part of, let's say, the prerequisite, the requirement that we need to, let's say, function as human the safe way, right? So more and more, I think this is going to be something that we will see, like, companies being able to, let's say, have that kind of a competitive edge in terms of trust, in terms of transparency, gaining a premium from their audience, from the market, from their customers, because the more the societies will be AI mediated, and the more this is going to be, let's say, an expectation for each and every one of us.
Well, thank you. To go back to our metaphor, we have to pump the brakes on our conversation. But really important question, the most important question I've maybe asked all VivaTech, World Cup prediction. Who's got it?
Well, that's a complex question because I think the game is not that easy. So let's wait a little bit to make some predictions.
Fair enough. There we go. Okay, thank you all for the time. Hamilton, great talking with you. Appreciate it.